us focusing on our imperfections, but I am who God says that I am, right? And then we go on to what? The shoes of peace or the boots of peace. That God has made you and I at peace with God, but we're also peacemakers. That our trust and our peace in Him is what? Our God rules and reigns and our God saves. But He's made you a messenger to tell other people to make peace with them with God. Your God rules, your God saves, that the ones who have received it are the very ones that can give it. Isn't that beautiful? That God makes us a part of this great plan and this great battle that we have. And then today He goes to the shield of faith. Let's look at the verse 13. Therefore, put on every piece of God's armor. And like I said, that belt of truth, that breastplate of righteousness, the shoes of peace. But at the verse 16, he says, in addition to all of these things, hold up the shield of faith to stop the fiery arrows of the devil. The enemy's going to attack, right? And what I like is, I want you to notice this. He basically says that you will be able to extinguish the fire from those arrows. That his faith becomes what? Your faith. Yes, it's God, but it's God through you and I, and we get to be a part of it, and we're going to talk more about that. But I love the way Matthew Henry said this in his commentary, speaking of this text. He says this of the enemy: the devil assaults us in the things that belong to our souls, and labors to deface the heavenly image in our hearts. I think that's beautifully said. That when Christ comes in you, He gives you a hope, and He gives you that aspect of that He's living in me and I can become like Him. I am who He says I am, but what does the enemy do? He comes to attack and to steal and to kill and to destroy and to distract. We'll be talking about that. But Paul's saying again, like that, even though you've got this breastplate of righteousness, there's another layer of protection called the shield of faith. Now, the word shield here in the Greek that Paul uses is a Greek word called thurios. And it was first found in the year 3 BC. Now, this is only about, 40, 50, 60 years later than that. Paul is quoting that Greek word that only came about in the year 3 BC. And what thurios is, it's speaking of a door. Now, I want you to show the Roman shield from that time. This is the only one known in existence. Archaeologically, this is the only shield from this time, and you're looking at it, and that's a thurios. That's what Paul was referring to as the shield of faith. Does it not look like a door? How many of you like to have that when anybody, kids, back in the day, you had bottle rocket fights? Or back before goggles, you're literally just throwing rocks because there was nothing else to do? Wouldn't you have loved to have stood behind a door like that? Now, I want you to see what happens when the Romans came together as a battalion. Look what happens when they're all together like that. How would you like to be the army that doesn't have their armor? You've got your slings, you've got your spears, you got your swords, you got your arrows, and there's nothing you can do. All you're going to do is waste your ammunition. And literally, God's saying, if you armor up, the enemy is going to be wasting his ammunition on you. The enemy's defeated before they even try. Can you imagine the Germanic barbarians having to face this kind of stuff? That would have been so hard. So this is what the shield of faith in God does for you. I want to show you three major parts, and the fourth one's the most important, but we're going to talk about three first. Your shield of faith, number one, is protective and impenetrable. Literally, the enemy has no weapon that can defeat the faith of God when it's actively a part of your life. When you are actively living out that faith and that shield, there's not a weapon the enemy has to defeat it. Number two, your shield of faith is active and advancing. It's not just a defensive weapon, but it actually is offensive. You're going to see that it will go and it will make a way for you where it seems impossible. Number three, your active faith is, and I love this one, is all around you. When he's saying that, we see that door, we see one directional. What you're going to find out is the shield of faith that God gives you and I is a dome. Think of the silver dome, like a force field around you. And how are all of those things possible? Because the fourth point's the most important. Your shield of faith is God Himself. You need to hold on to that nugget as we go back, and we're going to mow that row again online as well. Your shield of faith that God is talking about is not some force like in Star Wars. It's not something, it's someone. And the first time that you ever see it mentioned, the first time God ever says, I am your shield, is in Genesis chapter 15. Don't show the scripture yet. What's happening, Abram and Sarah are trying to go into the promised land, living out in faith, the father and mother of faith. And remember the series, Cousin Eddie, Lot, is living down there by Sodom and Gomorrah. There's 4 kings that come and defeat the 5 kingdoms in that area. The king of Sodom and Gomorrah and Lot was living there. They get all swept up as plunder. And Abram goes off with his men and has an amazing victory. He risked his life. It probably would look like a suicide mission, but you see God protect Abram. And Abram then has the rights to the spoils of the war, but then there's a showdown. Anybody like the Wild Westerns where they're out there in the alley and it's like, wow, wow, wow. And there's a good cowboy and the bad cowboy and the guy dressed in black and he's mean. Well, that was the king of Sodom. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, he says, you can have all the plunder. You can have all the wealth of this city. When it was rightfully his anyway, because it was the plunders of war. But Abram responded and said, I have sworn to God Most High that I will not even touch a thread, not even a lace on your sandal, that you will ever be able to say that you made Abram rich. Basically, I'm putting my faith and trust in God. Now, how many think he ticked off the bad guy? I mean, he's the king of Sodom. He's evil. He's sinful, right? And that night is when God reveals this aspect of his nature for you and I. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. You see, when God is your shield, and his infinite power and wisdom, is there anything anyone can do if that shield is active? Absolutely not. But now I want you to go back and hold on to the fact when it's saying shield, it's saying God himself, this is how he works for you and I when we're living out our active faith in him. This is so cool, so exciting. I've been looking forward to this. Let's go through it again. Number 1, your shield of faith is protective and impenetrable. Verse 16, in addition to all this, taking up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Not only is it impenetrable, it is also this part of protection that you get to actually have that faith which can cancel out what the enemy's trying to do to you. That God's faith, God himself, somehow melds with you and I to where we're a part of that protection and the enemy can't come in. And it's impenetrable. Now, if you think about it, it's almost laughable when you think when God himself is your shield, then how does the enemy think he can win? God, who is what? Infinitely stronger, infinitely wiser, right? Infinitely more powerful. And God knows the plans of the enemy, but the enemy doesn't know the plans of God. Now go back to communion. The enemy thought to themselves, if we can kill Jesus, the Son of God, we will stop God from saving mankind and his people. How stupid. Because when they did it, they guaranteed the salvation of mankind, and they guaranteed their doom. Is that not awesome? Thank you, Vince. Is that not awesome? So we think the devil's smart. No. God is infinitely greater. The devil is a created being. Fallen angels are created beings. Yes, they are powerful, but compared to an infinite God, it's laughable.